whatever time of day it is in this dark room. My name is Elaine Leader, and I'm the Dean of the School of Social Sciences, and I was waiting for Darius to show up, but rather than to wait any longer, I've decided to start because it would be quite exciting to begin this discussion this evening. Now, I know Darius will come along, and he will have a lot of thank yous to give, but I particularly want to thank all the people who have sponsored this event, including, of course, the Holocaust Study Center, Holocaust and Genocide Study Center, as well as the Intercultural Center, as well as the IRA students' monies that have been able to pay for these wonderful series of lectures, as well as the School of Social Sciences, who have been sponsoring this, as well as associated students, and many, many other groups and organizations who've collaborated to bring a series of really remarkable speakers to our campus this year. I hope some of you were at the Cornell West event recently. We're having Louis Rodriguez. We have Luong today. It's all pretty exciting. This campus is becoming and has long been an exciting campus, but the intellectual pulse beat of this campus is quickening by having the kinds of speakers that we've had in this series this year. So I'm really thrilled today to introduce Luong, who, as those of you who have read part of her book know, is a survivor of the Cambodian genocide. She was born in 1970 to a middle-class family in Phnom Penh, and 5 years later her family was forced out of the city through a mass evacuation into the countryside. By 1978, the Khmer Rouge had killed her parents, two of her siblings, and she was forced to train as a child soldier. In 1980, she and her older brother escaped by boat to Thailand, where they spent 5 months in a refugee camp, and they finally relocated to Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, through the sponsorship of the Holy Family Church. Many of you have read her memoir, First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers, which was published in the year 2000, and has received numerous awards, including the Books for a Better World Literary Award. It's been translated in published in 11 countries, translated in German and Dutch and Norwegian and Danish and French and Spanish and Italian, Cambodian and Japanese. And Luong just told me that her second book will be out in April, also published by HarperCollins, and it'll be called Lucky Child, and it's about her surviving the genocide and a contrast with what happened with her sister, who stayed back in Cambodia. So it'll be quite a story. She's also working on her third book, having now returned to Cambodia at least 25 times. And her third book will be about the importance of acting globally as well as acting locally. I've just had a wonderful opportunity to chat with her, which I'm hoping that many of you will be able to do later. She's very charismatic and smart and funny, and told me about her experiences at the Democratic National Convention, meeting Barack Obama and other such luminaries. And for those of us who know survivors, my father having been a survivor of the Holocaust, and hers with the Cambodian genocide, we know sometimes we look at our worlds and wondered, how did I get here when the rest of my family is dead? So today we have the honor of hearing Luong, and I bring her to the stage right now. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction, Elaine. Could I ask a quick favor? Could we just dim the light tiny bit? All right, maybe not. Anyway, it is a pleasure to be here. Okay. Oh, wow, I think they just dimmed the light a little because I can actually see you guys. I am height challenged, for those of you who are curious, and therefore lights on normal people tend to just be right in my eyes. And I also like you to ask you to bear with me, please. This is, English is not my first language. It is my fourth. And when I'm speaking, or about to speak on something that is near and dear to my heart, it is often very nerve-wracking for me, so I will try and not swear in any other languages but English. Today I'm here to share with you a little bit about my experience of growing up in Cambodia and surviving the Khmer Rouge, and then we'll segment that into the possible tribunal, international tribunal, that is looking like it will take place sometime next year, or sometime later this year or next year, for the crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide that the Khmer Rouge committed. Here in Sonoma, I think often we can look at the beautiful surrounding, and in different parts of the country where I'm from, where I've traveled to, and think that we are sheltered from the outside world. But with CNN and the internet and everything that we're able to access, we know that we're not sheltered. We know that the world is just encroaching into our space every day. As a child, I didn't know anything about America. I didn't know anything about the outside world, the international community. I didn't know anything about the Vietnam War as it was steadily moving into Cambodia. I didn't know that Cambodia, as a small country the size of the state of Oklahoma, with a population of 7 million people, was a neutral country in the war that was called the Third Indochina War. I didn't know anything about the Soviet Union, the superpowers, the Chinese, and the U.S. supporting and fighting in various theaters in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And I didn't care about that. And we can talk a little bit more about the history of Cambodia later on in the discussion and question period. All I knew was, as a child, my parents were the most important thing in my life. My parents and my family. My father, as a high-ranking military officer, his job afforded us a lifestyle privilege. My mother at 5'7" was an Amazon in our society. With 7 kids, she was a super domestic engineer as well. I lived my life with my 3 brothers and sisters. My brothers were all so very cool back in the 70s as they listened to their Beatles and Elvis songs on their 8-track tapes, danced to their music in their bell-bottom pants, which are back in. And they were so enthralled with Elvis in the 70s, which unfortunately also had the trend to have sideburns. Americans, that's fine, but for a lot of Asians, especially men, I know there are always exceptions, they just can't grow sideburns. What ended up is that they grow these long pieces of hair that curls up like curly cues. My sisters and I fought so loud and so often, my father threatened to replace us with monkeys. We lived in a house full of modern amenities such as toilets and flushing toilets and washing machines. We lived in a house full of toys and clothes and music and dance, and across the street there were people and culture. My father was a big believer in education. In Cambodia, the population at the time was 85% of the people were Buddhist and agricultural people. They lived their lives revolving around Buddhist festivals, farmings, and marriages. But in my life, we were made to go to school 3 times a day, 6 days a week, studying English, French, Chinese, Cambodian. And on Sunday, on our day off, my father would allow us to either go to the movie theaters or to the swimming pool. As a child, my fondest memory was of going, all of us as a family, across the street to the movie theaters, where in the dark my father would cross his leg that perfect way, creating that perfect bottom of lap. And in the dark, I would have my favorite drink, soybean drink, my favorite movie food, fried crickets, much crunchier than popcorn, doesn't get stale, goes really good with beer. But you're underage, I'm sure some of you. And in the dark, I would sit on his lap, and I would squirm and move around. And when I got bored of holding my food, I would just gently nudge him. Without a word, he would just turn his palms upward, and I would put my food and drinks into his hands. In Cambodia, we didn't have cup holders, but when you had parents, you didn't need them. My father's lap was my chair, his arms were my armrest, and his hands were my cup holders. I had everything. I didn't need anything else. But that charmed life came to an end on 1975, April 17th. I was but 5 years old. And I remember playing on the street, playing hopscotch with my sister when the storm of trucks, the Khmer Rouge, the communist group, came roaring into the city. I didn't know anything about the communists. And I saw them standing body to body in their black clothes, big smiles in their face. And war came in to my front door. Unlike us, many people living in America, my war didn't come in via the television screen, the radio, the newspapers. I couldn't get it off, couldn't turn it off, couldn't avoid it. And the soldiers came in. And at first we were cheering because they said the war is over. And right after that, they were raising their guns and shooting into the air, and they said, you must leave. Pack as little as you can to sustain you for 3 days. And once after that, you can come back, but we had to leave because the Americans were going to bomb the city. And if we didn't leave, we would die. It took me many years to realize that the scars of wars and bombs took many more than 3 days to disappear. But I was 5 years old. I didn't know anything. My parents hastily packed what little food and clothing we had, and all of us poured out into the city. The city I was born in, Phnom Penh, had a population of 2 million people. It was evacuated in 72 hours. Now, when 9/11 happened and I was living in Washington, D.C., and there were talks of evacuations, of people leaving, of upcoming war, for many people in America, it was a concept. But for me, it was a reliving of the war's past. We came to America to look for safety. If we had to leave America, where would we go? As a result of the post-traumatic experiences of many Cambodians who have gone through that first evacuation, after 9/11, mental health agencies all over the country saw a 50% spike in refugees seeking help. But I was a child then, and I didn't know, and so we left. And we moved and walked. The soldiers stood and guarded the side of the roads, keep telling us to leave, and we didn't know where to go. I didn't know the policies of the Khmer Rouge at the time. All I knew that when the Khmer Rouge, the communist group that had won the war and took over the country, wanted to create a pure utopian agrarian society. A society where power would be taken from the elite and given to the poor and the peasants. A society where people's worth and reason for them being kept alive was how well they farm, how productive they are in the field. And so the Khmer Rouge, the communists, closed down the borders of Cambodia, expelled all foreigners, kicked everybody out, evacuated all Cambodians from all the cities, and made everybody to live in the countryside. Now imagine what would happen if New Yorkers, San Franciscoans, Chicago's and Boston and all the city people were forced out of their urban homes and made to live in Iowa, Dakota, Vermont, and made to farm. What would they do? How would they survive? They wouldn't know a thing. And that was us. We didn't know anything when we moved to the city. We just knew that we were in danger. From that moment on, chaos and fear spread throughout the country. As people were forced to leave their homes, our lives became ones where it was just between fear and safety. We were all made to live in villages that were more akin to labor camps. And in the labor camps, no matter if you were 6 or 60, you worked, digging trenches, building dams, growing rice. And at these labor camps, every day, for the duration of the Khmer Rouge regime, 3 years, 8 months, and 24 and 28 days for your whole college career. Every day consisted of only Mondays. There would be no Fridays, Saturdays, weekend holidays. And every Monday was a work day. Imagine if you were quarantined in Sonoma State for 4 years. If this was Cambodia, and everything you knew in your past life were persecuted or abandoned, abolished, where the dean or the student government dictated what you would do, where would you go, when you would eat. If they made laws regarding what you could wear. For during the Khmer Rouge, there were no such thing as color clothes and fashion. You were rationed a pair of black shirt and pants of which you had to wear until it became so tattered. A few months later, you would get new ones. There would be no such thing as hairstyle and jewelry and makeup. That would be vanity. Girls were made to get the same haircut and boys were made to get the same crop cut. Your friends, and when you reached out to your parents if you could no longer communicate with them in your language. Whether it's Ebonics or Valley Girls or English or Chinese, you would have to use the same official sanctioned language in calling your father book, which is basically the word for birth father. There would be no friends, no girlfriends, no best friend, no girl. All and everybody would be greeted as comrade. You would be told when you could eat, where you could travel, when you could see your parents, what religion you could practice. And if you broke the rules, you could be beaten and punished, and your families killed. And if you were a musician and a dancer, if you loved movies and you loved to read, you're now in a quarantine society where none of that exists anymore. Movie theaters were banned. Books were destroyed. All machineries were taken and burned, and you couldn't be expressive in your own language anymore. Where do you go to find sanctuary for your mind? And that was the country I went to live in. I came from a culture that's not very different from yours. I had music, I had friends, I had culture. I loved junk food. And then I went to a culture where none of that existed anymore. And I couldn't speak. We were living in hidings in different villages, taking different names, pretending to be a farmer. Because I knew if I could speak and I said something wrong, and they found out that I wasn't who I was, I could be killed and my parents could be killed. To survive, you had to be dumb, deaf, mute, blind, invisible. How would you become a human being? How would you be a human being in that kind of society? It was very difficult. And then there's the fear of execution. For those, we were living in villages, and we were always constantly on the run. We also knew that in the villages, every other night, every other week, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the uncles of our family, of our neighbors, were disappearing in the middle of the night. And the soldiers would come with excuses. And then the parents and the fathers and the people would never be seen again. Because of my father's political affiliation, we knew we were in danger. And so we kept running. But I knew we couldn't hide forever. For in this society where they wanted everybody to be the same, they wanted people to be just farm workers, everybody else who were different were deemed as threats and traitors. And so this new government, ANCA, the organization the Khmer Rouge has known us, they would send out soldiers into the countryside, into the village. And they would gather at first the doctors, the lawyers, the civil servants, the politicians, the teachers, the students, people who spoke a different language, people who traveled to another country, people of different race, heritage. And they had these people executed en masse. And still everywhere they looked, they saw more traitors and people who could speak out. And so they sent out more soldiers. And they looked for the wives and the children of people they killed. And my father knew that, even though I didn't. And so when the soldier came for my father with their guns and their grenades around their belt, and they said they needed him to escape, to help dig out an ox cart stuck in the mud, my mother started to cry, and my father picked all the kids up and held us. And when it was my turn and they picked me up, and I wrapped my arms around him, my face resting at the nape of his neck, my feet dangling in the air, and I smelled his odor, and I knew it would be the last time I would see him. But I didn't want to believe it. And when he walked off with the soldiers into the sunset, and he didn't look back, I asked the God, how can there be beauty in the world when there was only hell in my world? It took me another 15 years to be able to stare at a glorious sunset and not want to stab an instrument into my stomach and scream in pain and in anger and in rage. And yet, I didn't understand why that was going on until I wrote my book. And when my father walked off, that first night, I didn't ask the gods to help him escape, to make sure he was alive, for him to be out in the mountains somewhere leading a rebellious armies. I didn't ask him to come back to me. I prayed only for the gods to make sure that his death was quick and painless. I didn't want him to suffer. I was 7 years old. In Cambodia today, they've discovered over 20,000 mass graves. Majority of them, over 1 million skulls. Somebody's fathers and brothers and families were killed with blunt instruments to the back of their heads. For traitors, the communist Khmer Rouge believed did not deserve a quick death. Bullets were saved for the enemies, for warfare. Traitors were killed quickly and pushed into mass graves. I don't know what really happened to my father. I've never seen him. I've not heard from him again except for in spirits. But I do know that he's not here, that he's not on the earth anymore. Because even as a child, I knew that my father didn't just love me, he adored me. And if he was alive, there would be no landmines, no warfare left that could keep him away from me. And 3 months after he was taken, my mother gathered us around and said, I cannot take care of you. I want you to leave. You walk south, you go north, you go east, you go west. Find an orphanage. Take a different name. Pretend that I'm dead already. And I didn't want to. She turned me by my shoulders, pushed me out the door with a swat on the butt and said, I don't want you. And I thought she was weak. I thought she didn't love me. I thought she wasn't strong enough to keep us together. And it took me so many more years to realize she was the strongest woman I'll ever meet. To have that strength to send off your kids into the war zone, not know if they would live or die, be tortured, be killed, be raped. I just don't know if I could have done it. I travel a lot now in my life. And though I don't have families and kids to leave behind, I have my pet rock. I have a couple of plants. which die on me every couple of months. But I miss my pet rock. You guys don't have to think about sending me rocks. Ever since I've been putting that out there, people have been sending me rocks. And it's like, what am I going to do with all these pet rocks? And I just missed my home, and I just couldn't believe what my mother had to go through. A year after I left her, I found out I didn't have to pretend to be an orphan anymore. The soldiers had came for my mother and my 4-year-old sister, who was too young to leave her. She was 4 years old. What were her crimes? How could she have been a danger to any society? She was too young, and therefore she couldn't find food, didn't know how to fend for herself, didn't have the verbal skills to speak out. I don't know what happened to them. Of the million skulls in the mass graves, many of the skulls were of little people, of children. I don't want to know what happened to my family. My prayers are still that they were killed quick and painless. So you can imagine when I left my parents, I was so full of anger and rage. I hated the world. I thought people didn't care about me. People didn't know. People didn't want to see. So I stomped off into an orphanage camp. And when the supervisors saw the anger in me, they didn't take me aside and said, fighting is not good. They took me aside and put me into a child soldiers training camp. I know even though I'm small in stature, I'm mighty in might, I can still take a lot of people down. But I've been a peace activist for the last 14 years. So while you, when you were 5 years old, you were sitting in your class, learning to make friends, learning your language, learning math, I was sitting in class, being brainwashed. The world out there wanted me dead. The Americans, the Chinese, the French, the Vietnamese. Because I was the children of the revolution. And in order to protect the country and the revolution and myself, I had to take people out first. Because people out there were dangerous. And if they came and they saw me and they captured me, I would be raped, tortured, and killed. And when they weren't brainwashing me, and when you were sitting around playing balls and in gym class, I was out in the fields for hours on end learning how to run in zigzag lines. Because when I was told that if I was being shot at, it'd be harder for the soldiers to hit me if I was running in a zigzag line. When you were playing guns with your war toy games, I was giving real knives and sickles and guns to use as weapons to take people out. When you were playing hide and seek with your friends and your neighbors, I was hiding in a bomb shelter, waiting for the bombs to come. And as they whiz over and hit somewhere else, a part of me was even really sad because I know it won't stop. And when the bomb did hit my bomb shelter, and I reached out for my friend Pithy, who was only 9 years old, instead of her head, there was only a hole. I had to brush bits and pieces of brain off my sleeves to survive. I couldn't wake up from my war. No one ever asked me, the way they're asking me now with the publication of my book, if my life was too difficult to live. People ask me if my book is too difficult for people to read. It should be difficult. War is a difficult thing. And I was lucky and I survived. By 1979, the Vietnamese defeated the Khmer Rouge, chased them into the jungle, and ended the genocide. But it was too late. It was too late for an estimate of 2 million Cambodians who were killed out of a population of 7 million Cambodians. We're over a quarter of the population. It was too late for my parents, 2 sisters, and 20 other relatives. But I survived. I was very lucky. And after the war, there was no economy. There was only destruction. There was no jobs. We were afraid that the soldiers, the Khmers, would come back into power, and we would be in danger again. My 5 siblings who were together and were reunited knew that we needed a better way. We wanted to find a way to have a second chance at life. We made the decision to leave the country, to go and try to make our ways to America. And there were only 2 ways to come to America then. You either walk the land and cross into the border of Cambodia to the refugee camp in Thailand. But to do that, you have to cross the landmines. The land littered with millions of landmines, otherwise known as the silent sentinels of death. And we didn't want to risk that. We didn't want to risk losing any of the members of our families. The other way was to find enough gold money to buy seats on a boat from Cambodia to Thailand, and then from Vietnam, and then from Vietnam to Thailand. We were able to find enough gold to take my oldest brother, sister-in-law, and myself, and therefore leaving 3 other family siblings behind. And thus we joined the boat journey of many other refugees and made it to Thailand. I promised my sisters that we would be reunited in 5 years. It would be 15 years again before I saw her face to face for the first time. But in the refugee camp, we were promised of this new life that could be possible for us. At the refugee camps, the mission workers would come and try to tell us this place called America, which I didn't know anything about. A place that I was told I would be immigrating to. And they would do this by showing us movies about America. Now, for those of you who travel, you know that movies that makes its way to a third world country tend to be big budgeted movies, taking place in places like Boston or New York, places where there are diverse people. We were told we were coming to a place called Essex Junction, Vermont. I asked them if this was like LA, which I was seeing on screen. They said yes. It wasn't. When I arrived in Vermont on June 10th, 1980, I was shocked to discover that there were more black on cows than there were on people. It was very scary. Vermont still is today the whitest state in America. For more diversity, I moved to Maine, the second whitest state in America. People in Vermont didn't know anything about Cambodia, and they didn't know that Cambodia had just gone through a war. So our sponsor really wanted to introduce American culture to us. So they took us to the 4th of July fireworks display. Exactly. We went into therapy for many years. When the first firework display happened, I was trying to get underneath the bench because I thought the war was coming again. And then there was the language barrier. People didn't know that it wasn't abusive for my sister-in-law to feed me rice 3 times a day, 7 days a week. We like rice. We didn't like Uncle Ben's rice. We really didn't like instant rice that you can make in 5 minutes. They didn't understand also why we were so enamored with colors. That first fall, as the mountains of Vermont were ablaze in red and gold and magenta, and the world which is filled with all these brilliant colors, we fell in love. For 4 years, I had been forced to wear black shirts and black pants. And so I went to school with green eyeshadows, purple shirt, orange belt, red skirt, green shoes. I thought I was being very colorful. The students thought I was colorblind. And I didn't speak a single word of English. Now, for non-native speakers, you'll understand, English is ridiculous. You have exceptions for every exception for the rules, and none of the native speakers seems to know the rules themselves. I ask you, why is grass not grasses in plural? You can't tell me, you just tell me it sounds right. I don't have this thing in my head that says it sounds right. And then you have words that sound exactly like each other. Windshield, wind chill. I thought you meant windshield factor, not windshield factor. And then there were the expressions. For years, I thought when we need to go speedily somewhere, we book it. And the expressions we book it, I thought it was we buck it. For in Vermont, we have deers. Deers, doe, buck. They go very fast. So if you want to go fast, you buck it. People thought I had a thick accent, which I did. Took years of speech therapy before they understood I actually said bucket and not book it. And then there were the abbreviations. In class one day, in my finance class, I was given the assignment of giving a talk on CD, Certificate of Deposit. My assignment was to take $2,000, find ways to invest it, and I worked really hard, got up the next day, and said, well, if you, instead of spending it, you buy a CD, you compound the interest, and you have all this money left over when you're 22, and instead of investing it in a great vacation, you could invest it in a really nice condom in Florida. It really should be condom and not condo. Of course, people didn't really understand, and I didn't have anybody like you to help you with your homework. I was the best English speaker in my household. When kids taught me the 4 wonderful letter words, I didn't have people telling me they were not good 4-letter words. So I went home and taught it to my brothers, my brother and sister-in-law, and we waved to our neighbors, hey, F you. What's going on, ho? But it took us a while. And in my homework assignment, for me, it was the toughest because I had to struggle with it myself. And then one assignment that was a lot of fun in English, which was my hardest topic. I was given the assignment in a spelling class. You remember when you're given a big word, you're supposed to find little words in your big word. My word was Saturday. I worked really hard, went up the next day. Saturday, I wrote it down. And then there's the word sat. There's the word day. And then there's the word turd in the middle. I didn't know what turd meant, and so the people laughed, and the teacher asked me if I knew what turd meant. And I thought, well, of course I did. I'm very colorful. Kids were calling me a turd. It must have been mean, cool, colorful person. That wasn't it. So some kid called me a pain in the neck for not understanding English and wouldn't explain, so I beat her in the neck. She never called me a pain in the neck again, so my English wasn't that bad. I was very lucky. And even though I was a fairly average student in English, there are such things called editors. And I'm actually now about to put out 2 books. And in America, you know this expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch unless you write a book about hunger. Unless you tell them about how hungry you were on your 6th birthday. You chewed on a piece of charcoal and pretended it was cake. And then you talk about it in a lecture, and they buy you a lot of food. And then you do international tours in Italy and Japan, and they buy you a lot of food everywhere. That's a really cool thing. So I was very lucky, and I made it to America. And I learned, and I survived. And my first book, it's about surviving war, and my second book is about surviving peace. For even though I only share with you numerous humorous episodes of my life growing up in Cambodia, I was having actually a really difficult time surviving peace. When war is over, and the media or the peace treaty been signed, and the media no longer covers it, and the media no longer writes about it, and the guns fallen silent, the rest of the world, to the rest of the world it might be over, but to survivor it is not. 120 million people gone through some kind of wars in the last century. For those of us with family members who went through it ourselves, it is not over. And so even though while I lived in America, in a place, in a land of peace, at night the soldiers were still after me. They were still trying to kill me. I dream of grabbing them, of taking a knife and slicing their neck, and remembering how the blood was splattering me and why it took me so long, and then realizing that I would grab the butter knife. And when I went through puberty and started my menstruation, for a lot of girls, it's just about the process of going from girls to women. And in the 80s, they didn't tell you anything about the chemical changes as well as the physical changes. And for me, when I've seen that much blood coming from a human body, it meant that they were either dead or dying. And so I thought I was dying. And I attempted suicide numerous times. I didn't want to die slowly in pain the way I've witnessed other people. I wanted to end quickly. For my sister in Cambodia, it wasn't a matter of crouching underneath the bench to hide away from the 4th of July fireworks. It was literally still trying to escape the landmines that still tainted today 50% of Cambodia's land and 50% of the villages. I've been back to Cambodia 25 times now, and it is a beautiful country. I'm so ready to move there now, except that to do my work, I needed to be in America where I can be heard louder. Cambodia is a fledgling democracy. The people are slowly healing, but 50% of the people are still suffering from post-traumatic stress. They're friendly, wonderful people who do not understand and do not have this sense of entitlement that they need to have protection. But when it is given, they are very grateful. I've been very busy in America, busy surviving. As a child, when I was 10 until I was 25, my whole focus was to be just like you, to be normal. When I realized I couldn't go back to Cambodia for political reasons, U.S. didn't have democracy, didn't have normalizations and democratic diplomatic relations with Cambodia until 1993 because the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia. And therefore, I couldn't connect and communicate with my siblings without having to do it with a third country, from sending letters to Vietnam or Australia before the letters 3-4 months later getting to Cambodia. I resigned myself not to see my sister again. I focused on becoming an American girl. I learned about color coordination. In the 80s, I became a cheerleader, which I thought was cool. I tried to be very trendy, which unfortunately at the time, the hairstyle was just like Farrah Fawcett, the little feather style. Asian hair is very difficult to feather. I tried to speak the lingo of the time, which unfortunately was Valley Girl language, where we started every sentences and ended with duh and gag me. Unfortunately, I never quite got the expression right. So instead of saying, gag me with a spoon, I often went around and go, gag me with a fork or a knife. I wanted to be just like everybody else. That was before being a dysfunctional person in the family is cool. Back then, it wasn't so cool. I went to school and did well enough to get a scholarship to a 4-year private Catholic college where I had to take all the Christianity courses. And then on the side, I took feminist theology, witchcraft, Buddhism, Hinduism, and everything else. And it wasn't until 1995 when I went back to Cambodia. That trip changed my life. I came back and decided I wanted to reconnect to Cambodia. And that's the focus of my third book. For in Cambodia, when I got there, everywhere I went, everywhere I looked, in all the different villages, in the hospitals, in the restaurants, I was coming in contact with perfectly healthy people with great smile and strong spirits who were missing an eye, an arm, a leg, parts and bits of their bodies. And unlike the AIDS clinics that I visited year after year, these people do not get sicker, will not die on me, didn't need that consistent medical support. All they need was an arm, a prosthetic arm, leg, wheelchair, to have mobility, to have a second chance to survive the peace. And so I joined the international campaign to ban landmines and ended up working a lot in Cambodia, supporting a program where we manufacture prosthetic limbs and other mobile devices. Since 1991, we fitted over 15,000 individuals with new legs, arms, wheelchairs. And can you believe, in a world where we're talking about billions of dollars to invest in peace, where billions of dollars is needed to make a difference, the 15,000 people we've helped, we've committed $158 maybe per person per year. If they needed a full leg, we can make a leg for the price of a sneaker, a pair of sneakers that you buy. So imagine if for prosthetic limbs, and first of all, landmines, the second most painful injury, second to burns. When you step on it, everything below you, rock, dirt, toenail, grass, bones, becomes secondary missile, shooting up to your leg, disintegrating your flesh, melting off your leg. And if you get amputations made, 50% of the time you need to have an amputation, and you survive, with a prosthetic leg, you can walk, you can work, you could bite, you could live. I work with Vietnam veterans, and I swear every other week they would come in and tell me how their limbs, some of my colleagues, how their limbs were killing them and hurting them. My colleague Ed Miles used to say that to me, and I said, Ed, you have no legs. You have no toes. You left them in Cambodia. He told me this thing called phantom pains. Even though the limbs aren't there, he can still feel the pain. He wakes up, takes his medication, he rationalizes it, and then he can get himself out of it. For kids who've been hurt by landmines, who've lost their limbs. I was 10 years old when I was escaping the Khmer Rouge, when I fought my way out of a rape. I was 10 years old and I left Cambodia with all my limbs intact. But if I had not, and I got hurt, chances are I might not have survived because a lot of the landmines were designed to cause the most injuries around adult middle-level areas. For kids, it's their head and chest. And if I survived, depending on how fast I grow, how fat I was, how well the amputations were made, every 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half, if I was lucky, I would have to go back to the hospital and have my stump cut and recut and cut and recut again until I stopped growing. And that could be 6 to 8 more surgeries. For even though your heel stumps don't grow anymore, Most of the times your bones do. And they'll start growing and growing and won't stop until they protrude out of your stump. And when we see them at the hospitals, the clinics, their parents were busy farming, they didn't have time, it's too painful. The bones would be 2-3 inches out of the stump. And the wounds are now infected, so we have to cut deeper into the stump. The higher you cut, the harder it is to fit you with the prosthetic limbs. But if we can get the help, you need to have sustainable help as well. Now, I know all of you. I know for a fact, all of you have more than one pair of shoes in your closet. A lot of you have cars, or access to trains, or planes, or automobiles, buses. If you're Cambodian, or one of the 18,000 people every year in Cambodia who've been hurt by landmines, and you don't have access to any form of transportation, your form of transportation is to walk. You only have that one pair of shoe, that prosthetic limb of which you wear every day, and you farm with every day. They wear out quickly. So every year you have to come back for new ones. And that's the result of other pressing issues, wars in other countries, of 9/11. Right now, U.S. government is cutting international humanitarian aid to programs like ours that are providing sustainable help to victims of landmines and victims of war. For the 15,000 people we helped in Cambodia, and we have centers in 14 other countries, in Vietnam, in El Salvador, in Kosovo, in Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, Angola. For all these people we give limbs to and therefore investing in peace, they do not want to hurt Americans. They become friends. They want and need our help. And so we have to be there to provide sustainable help. And I'm running slow on time, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the other thing that I spent a lot of my time with. When I first started in human rights, it was in 1997. I was young, didn't really know how to speak English very well, was very nervous about speaking in front of people, was very afraid I was going to spit at people in the front row. And so I got out there and wanted to tell the stories of Cambodia, the stories that the world needs to know beyond Cambodia, the stories of genocide that still continues to happen every day in our world, the stories of crimes against humanity and war crimes that hurts every one of us, whether we're Cambodians or American. I couldn't get people to hear me. And so I did what every other Americans would do. I wrote a tell-all book about my life. And then I got on TV and talked about it. And unfortunately, unlike all the TV shows, after 10 minutes of talking, and a lot of people stood up and applauded, I still wasn't healed. I was still hurting. And so I went out and started speaking full of rage and anger. And the more I spoke, the more I got to redeem myself, because I understood people just didn't know. They didn't know. And if you didn't know, how could you take action? And when they knew and they heard about my book and they start picking it up, now instead of knocking on doors to speak in front of people, I get invitations to go all over the world to speak in front of people. To United Nations, to Australia, where thousands of kids are reading my book because it's required reading. To American University, where my book was required reading freshman seminar. To Yale University, to be on TV and interview on Today's Show by Matt Lauer. To hang out with Angelina Jolie because she was in Cambodia working on landmines. And all these trips, to eat a lot of good food and not pay for it. It was really a cool thing. And so I wrote my book. And I've been so surprised. I expected it to sell 10 copies, and go into this literary black hole. My publisher had warned me that books like mine have a few weeks of shelf life maybe. And 4 years later, I'm still getting letters from all over the world, and the book is still being read in all these different languages. And as a result of that, I'm putting out my second book, timing it with, hopefully, a period when I think the Tribunal for the Khmer Rouge, to try them for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Of the 2 million Cambodians who were killed, can you believe there's been no tribunals to punish the perpetrators, to increase awareness, to educate the communities of what happened in all of the world? And so since 1997, I've also been dedicating my time to doing research, to supporting efforts all over the world, so that there will be an international tribunal for the Cambodia crimes. Since 1997, the United Nations and the Cambodian government have been negotiating. And there were different things that they were looking at. They were looking at a true international criminal court tribunal that to take place in The Hague, similar to what they did with Bosnia. They were looking at domestic courts, like the Rwanda, where the tribunal would take place in Cambodia with Cambodian judges. And they were looking at the truth and reconciliation process, where the process would focus on the victims and not the perpetrators. After 5 years of negotiation, they've signed an agreement on a tribunal that would be an unprecedented, first of its kind, a mixed tribunal system, where it would consist of Cambodian judges and UN judges working together in country in Cambodia, where information would be in Cambodia, and hopefully the proceeding would be given to the people. Of the many, and there's a lot of issues I can answer questions about the process and all the specific of the tribunal. But in looking at the tribunal, they sent in experts to Cambodia, interviewed thousands of people, survivors and scholars alike, and they came away with the 7 themes of why Cambodia needed a tribunal. And the first one is for peace, for the world body to recognize that Cambodia needed peace, and in order to do that, they needed to look at the past. And the second one the Cambodian people want in a tribunal is the full truth. For I share with you the story of what happened to me in my village, but I didn't know what was happening in the village next door, to my uncles in another town, because we were kept so isolated. They wanted a determining of responsibility. Who were responsible for it? 2 million people killed. A lot of people were involved in that. They wanted to know the international actors. The Soviet Union, China, the US, all had a hand in the creation of the Khmer Rouge, of the Khmer Rouge coming into power. I firmly believe that if it weren't for the US encroaching Vietnam War into Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge would not have had the power to take over the country. They also wanted amnesty for the lesser participants who were forced to commit crimes against humanity, like the child soldier. When my parents were killed and I was 8 years old and I was trained to hurt and killed, if I hadn't been saved and you came across my path and they told me to kill you, I have no question that I would have done it. If the war hadn't ended, and I was still in Cambodia and the war was still happening, I have no question that instead of a peace activist being wholly invested in working toward peace, I would have been a very efficient killer. But should I have been answered for the crimes I committed as an 8-year-old? And they wanted establishment of the law. How do you in a country enforce laws of murders and corruptions when the biggest mass murder that took place in your country that every single person in Cambodia suffered from. Now imagine a population of 280 million Americans and not a single person in the population did not lose a single family member to the war. And lastly, and most importantly, I think they need an education. The genocide today in Cambodia is not being taught in school. In Cambodia, except for grade 12 level. Majority of kids do not make it to grade 12. Cambodia has a 70% illiteracy rate. When kids ask about the genocide, they are told to go to the Genocide Museum where there are only skulls and no facts, and only facts of who killed and what happened, but no stories of who survived and how they fought to be here. All over the world, Cambodian Americans, Cambodian French, Cambodians like me were studying French, Russian, Chinese history, but we did not study Cambodian history. I had to do this on my own. I had to sit through 13 hours miniseries on PBS on the Vietnam War on Cambodia, of which I did. I had to read books after books on my own and not have a professor to discuss it with, to learn from. I had to find and reach out to professors who were kind enough to take time out to share with me what happened. Education is so important if we are to learn from the past, to make sure that it does not repeat itself. And I will end with this. Education is important in the work of peace. Education not just of the facts and data, but of the people, and stories not told by soldiers and journalists and foreigners who went to Cambodia. My book is one of the first ones to be told about Cambodia by a Cambodian person. For the majority of the people killed in Cambodia during that time, those that were primarily targeted were the elite, the doctors, the writers, the builders, people who spoke different languages. After the war, 60% of the people were women and children. Many of them were farmers. How do you rebuild a country in time of peace when you have no leaders? So Cambodia took a long time to rebuild, unlike Thailand and Japan and Vietnam. They had to wait for a second generation of young people to get an education. And in Cambodia, they had to survive because the Khmer Rouge didn't surrender until 1998. So people like me who left the country and got an education outside really needed to go back and share and learned, more than share, learned from the people who stayed behind, because they have so much to teach us as well. In my travels to Cambodia, I have learned two things that I live, and it's a philosophy I remind myself of every day. I'm not a peaceful person all the time. I know one thing for sure in life. Peace is not an automatic. Peace is not something you think, I want, therefore it is. Peace is not something you put your hand on a crystal ball and think, I wish, therefore it will be. Peace is not something you tell your neighbors and friends and uncle and hope they'll work for it. Peace is not something you think, I deserve it, so therefore I will have it. Peace is something that we must choose, decide on, and work for it every day in every aspect and every level of our lives, locally and globally. I am not, and many of us, to be honest, are not automatically peaceful people. I still have bad days, and especially have unpeaceful bad days in movie theaters. I love movies. I love thrillers. I love movies where I don't know the end until the end. I hate it when people are in movie theaters and talk through the whole thing. I hate it when they tell me when before the movie's over. And in the dark, I sit there and I look at their head, the profile of which I think to myself, a strategic kick to the head, I'll do it. I'll knock him out right now. But I don't do it. I consciously choose not to do it. I decide not to do it. And I don't act on it. And instead, I either kindly shush them or I move to another seat. That is a peaceful action. I want peace in Cambodia. And since my travels to Cambodia and my work in the international campaign that's taken me to many countries in the world, I've also realized that peace cannot be contained within any one specific borders of a country. As a result of my work, I see myself as an international world citizen. So we work for peace in our country and globally. We work for peace in our world. It is something that we can choose. And the other thing my travel to Cambodia has taught me, the survivors of the Cambodians who've been hurt, who've seen their entire families wiped out. I have a friend who is director of the Cambodian Documentation Center, where he's now working with a staff of 35, collected over 800,000 documents of the Khmer Rouge that will be used to support the tribunal. He witnessed his sister, his pregnant sister, who was accused of stealing rice. The soldier didn't believe him, didn't believe her, so they knifed her and opened up her stomach. And now he's working for peace. He has taught me that if I have witnessed in my short life man's worst inhumanity to man, in him and the many colleagues I worked with all over the world, in Landmines, refugee workers, the mission workers, the pastors, the Holy Family Church, people in Vermont, people here in Sonoma, I have witnessed that in all of us, there's the capability for man's best humanity to man. In a few specific people, I know this to be a fact. I have also seen in my life, blessedly, the best in man's humanity to man. And that is for our choosing as well. In all of this, we know, when we realize this, at least I know when I realize these two philosophies, that we do and can affect change. We just have to choose it, decide on it, and act on it locally and globally. And I'll end it with that and take questions. Thank you.
Was it hard to write in English?
Was it hard to write in English? Yeah, it was hard to write in English, but English is the only language I know how to write in. I speak fluent Cambodian and Chinese and pretty decent French when I had a few frozen margaritas. I'm of age, so I can. But it was hard to write in English in that the story was in Cambodian. And so I can write English on any, and I don't have a problem writing in English for other topics, but the stories in Cambodian, my parents' words were in Cambodian, my sister's words were in Cambodian, so I had to translate their words into English words, but also their meanings, because often words don't have a literal translation in English.
Yeah. What kind of language are you speaking? I mean, is it Cambodian all the time in Cambodia, or do they, I mean, does it have a language that they
Yeah. I speak Chinese, Cambodian, and French when I'm in Cambodia. I speak also English, and it really depends on different groups of people. In Cambodia, I speak primarily Cambodian, and with my family, I speak both Chinese and Cambodian now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your story, and that it is a personal story, I think, is the greatest power to reach all of us, to the students here, to the rest of us. My question is, it's clear that you were a courageous individual, starting from age 5, 6, 7, what you had to deal with. To what do you attribute the strength that you found? What was it in you? What can you give us that we can look for in ourselves that could help in such an awful time? And not just to take you through the survival, but to the point where you are here today with us. There was the survival, then there was the writing, and now you're taking the word out. What qualities, where do you go to for that?
Thank you. And I think for me, I know for me, things that were a great foundation in my life as a child was the uncertainty I knew that my father and my mother not only loved me but adored me. And to know that when I feel and thought of myself as a bad person for stealing food, for hurting other people, and I think to who my parents were and know that they were pretty cool, decent people. And if they were to love me, I couldn't be that bad. As a child, that helped. I think strengths are not a constant thing. There are things that we go through life and take what we need at certain times in my life. When I was going through the war, the strength that my parents loved me came in, and that was very beneficial, very helpful to me. And also my anger was very helpful to me. My mother sent me out and made sure I was angry. And I thought back then that I didn't understand it. Now I realize how well she knew me, how well she knew to push the button that was my strength, to make me angry so I would survive. With that said, it really wasn't until the publication of my book that I realized that my anger might have kept my physical body alive, but it was the love of my family and my parents, my sisters that kept my mind and my spirit alive. I know a lot of Cambodians who are still suffering and going through a lot of post-traumatic stress and not been able to climb out of the war. And for me, I've been able to have that through my life, and that really helped me not be in a mental institution. As an adult, learning in my degree in political science and traveling, and learning of the injustices that are still happening everywhere in the world. How insane is that? How lucky are we? And how insane is it that people like myself and my families and the 120 million people who survived their wars, the Holocaust, Rwanda, Kosovo, after they've survived their wars in all these countries where there are remnants of weapons left over, they're having a hard time surviving the peace. That is insane. My parents sacrificed everything so I could be here. Not so my sister could take a wrong step off the beaten track and get blown up. Injustices and human rights abuses all over the world. Child soldiers in Cambodia. Child prostitutions and AIDS, poverties. And yet, how frustrating it is to know also that we have such power and we willingly give it up. As a child, I had this insane curiosity my father always loved. I was interested in worms. I was interested in the big padded bras my mother wore. I was really interested in big boobs. In Cambodians, that was a big thing. Asian with huge knockers were. I admit it. If you ever go to Angkor Wat, which is this 12,000-year-old temple with beautiful sculptures of Apsara, the dancing goddess, you'll notice on majority of the dancing goddess, because they have sculpted huge boobs. It's all polished and shiny. Everybody's touched them who's been through it. I was very curious in the world, and my curiosity comes from just appreciation and curiosity of life. We have it. Every day you can take a breath and not think about it. As those people who are being killed and pushed into the mass graves, I can guarantee to you, and I don't know this for sure, but if we can talk to them, I can almost guarantee to you that their last thought and prayers was not so they could stay alive, so they can be rich and famous and do this and do that. They just want to stay alive so that they can take that next breath. They can live that next moment to see their families and loved ones. But even their families and loved ones, so they can take that breath. We have it. We have so much, but we willingly give it all away. So as an adult, that is my strength, my curiosity, my appreciation of how lucky we are. And I just want to work my hardest so other people in the world can just be, if not just as lucky as I am, just a little bit luckier so they can survive. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I had a question about the landmines that are still in Cambodia. I think it's atrocious, the amount of them that are there. Can you talk a little bit about the effort that is going on to remove them?
Yeah. It is estimated that there are anywhere between 4 to 6 million landmines left in Cambodia. In Cambodia, we have over 40,000 amputees now because of landmines. 1 in every 242 Cambodians is a landmine amputee, or an amputee. In the U.S., it's 1 out of 22,000 Americans who's an amputee, and that's usually due to automobile accidents or motorcycle accidents. In Cambodia, landmine is a weapon of mass destruction. In a time when we're talking about the search of, the lack thereof, trying to find it, landmines is killing, maiming, in Cambodia still at a rate of approximately 12,000 people, or 1,200, yeah, it's probably usually at 1,200 people a year, 18,000 people worldwide. It is a weapon of mass destruction in slow motion, taking one arm, one leg, one life at a time. There's a lot being done. The 3 main things that are being done that needs to continue to be done is 1, education. Kids who grew up years after the war, not knowing anything about the Khmer Rouge, well, the Americans, they know about landmines. They need to know what it looks like. We have programs where instead of books of Barbie dolls, they have books on the covers, of cover with landmines pictures, so they know. They need to be educated about landmines. They need to know that when they're grazing their cows, if they see it on landmines, not to go there, how to protect themselves. We have traveling shows, we have plays, we have comic books that are educating people on landmine. DC Comics worked with the international campaign to create a Batman series on Batman working with landmines. And then unfortunately they were doing this and putting the books in El Salvador and freaked out the kids there. Because in El Salvador, parents were taken away from men wearing dark clothes and with masks on a lot, and they were afraid, so they created a DC comic of Superman working with with landmines. So there's a number of things we're doing. The second thing we need to do is demining. There are units of people out there by Cambodian groups, the CMAC, Cambodian Mine Action Group, Mine Action Center, Norwegian group, British group, the U.S. expats, training Cambodians to go out there and clear the earth of landmines. And that's going to take many, many more years to clear Cambodia of landmines. They are now clearing priority areas where people can go back to farm, to the power plants, to the rice paddy, places where people traverse every day, because those are the places where landmines are put in. Landmines are not put in jungles where people don't go to. The whole sort of strategy behind landmines is that it's a weapon to terrorize civilians. If we can't win the war, we're going to make sure that you have very little back to come back to, and you're going to come back to a place full of danger. When they clear a landmine, you go out, find a land, and landmines the lands will always be fine because 500,000 animals step on the mines and all these people. They go out, one team put on a mask, get on the stomach, For more stability, sweep the land in front of the metal detector. First of all, it consists of two weapons system, a metal detector and a knife or a bayonet of some sort. They sweep the metal detector. Every time it beeps, a guy or girl gets down, probe the knife into a 45-degree angle into the land, and hope they don't detonate the land of the mine. Clear the earth, put TNT, and explode it. It's a very long, laborious, expensive, slow process. Because in a war and with a lot of migration, sometimes when the metal detector beeps, it's not always a mine. Could be a spoon, a spent shell, a cast bullet, but you have to treat it like a mine. The third thing that I think we need to do, and it's not as sexy, and it's harder to raise money for, and we also don't have celebrities like Paul McCartney and Heather Mills getting out there in the United Nations behind us, is providing sustainable help to victims of landmines. And that is to support centers where we manufacture prosthetic limbs, arms, wheelchairs, so that the victims of landmines can have mobility and have a chance to walk and work. Because they don't get sick, they're not going to die early. It's not like the other people who are sick from various diseases. I go back since 1997, and I see the same people over and over again, and they're healthy. They're just coming back, and they're just walking on prosthetic limbs. And that is what I focus on as humanitarian assistant and providing sustainable help to people. So those are the three things that have been done in Cambodia. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I read that in Cambodia, a lot of the Khmer Rouge are integrated in society. The survivor can see on the street somebody that committed an execution on his family. How was that experience in Cambodia?
Yeah. In Cambodia, the survivors and those that 2 million people died. A lot of people had a hand in it. And those people are our neighbors, our family, our neighbors, our villagers, and still living next door to us, a lot of them. Some have moved under different names. Some try to take different names, but eventually they were found out. It is a very difficult process, which is why Cambodians decided to go with the mixed tribunal system and decided that in their tribunal system they were only going to target the anywhere between 7 to 15 members of the Central Committee, members of the Khmer Rouge regime, those who were at the top, who made decisions, who signed people's death warrants. The rest of the people who were believed that under crimes, under threats of death and execution themselves, acted and hurt other people. I think it's going to be many more decades and for the next generation to work out. For me personally, I've known people who lived in villages. I have not had the strength to meet them myself. I've been asked to go and interview Khmer Rouge members, and the thought of shaking hands with them makes my skin crawl. I can't do it. I'm not able to do it. When Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge leader, died, and the rest of the world were shown images of this grandfatherly figure who was written about as a gentle man, a charismatic man, a good father to his 14-year-old daughter. My father was 42 years old when he was killed. If I could have reached my hand into the television screen and wrapped my fingers around his neck and squeezed, I would have done it. So I myself am not in that position of where I'm healed enough to do it yet. Healing is a personal journey. It's an individual journey. And slowly, I think we are all, in Cambodians and all of us in different lives are working on it. For me, at this point, I'm just taking my strength and working and fighting against injustices and abuses from the Khmer Rouge. For other people, it's very different.
I was just curious about you still have your siblings over there in Cambodia, right?
Yes.
And I'm curious as to if you're in the process of having them immigrate or if they're not interested or how that goes.
Yeah. I still have a brother. One of my brother eventually, my brother Kim, was able to escape Cambodia in 1995. He walked the minefields, very lucky, and then made his way to a refugee camp, very lucky, and through black market and $10,000, we were able to get him with a fake passport into France, where he went from Cambodia to Thailand to Germany to Russia to France. Where there's a way, there's a will, there's a way. And then it took us 12 years of legal paperwork to get him into America. In the U.S., it's been very difficult to sponsor. I mean, if you're a parent and you have a child or a child of a parent, it is a lot easier to sponsor your children. But for siblings, that doesn't have as much stature and as much value in the U.S. immigration policy. So we have been unable to sponsor my family members. I still have a brother and a sister in Cambodia. My sister's 2 years old and I am, with 5 kids. They still live in a village where there's only electricity from 6 to 9 if it comes on at all. But she's very happy, and they have not been to America. After years of first political instability and lack of political and diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Cambodia, and then it was SARS, and there was the Asian market crisis, and there was the worst flood in Cambodia in 75 years, and now it's bird flu. It's been very difficult to bring my families and sisters in, and we were hoping to be able to bring them to visit this year. But right now, the case and the story that's making the world is the bird flu that's taking place in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. So chances are they're not going to allow them in that easily. But they've never been.
I guess I was just curious if they were maybe so they were
Yeah.
choosing to stay there. They would come.
They actually wouldn't choose it anymore. My sister is now 36 years old, has got a family. They're very happy there. I actually would move to Cambodia. I am so ready to move there. A lot of my friends that have heard me talk about Cambodia since 1997 have actually moved there, my American friends, and with their American boyfriends or British boyfriend are now living there in Cambodia, and I'm actually not there. I go back as much as I can. I just got married. Last year I was there for 3 months. My husband had an issue with that. But this year I'll be back for another 3 months. They wouldn't want to move here. They have a really good life in Cambodia, and to come here, they wouldn't know the language, they wouldn't have the skills, they wouldn't know how to live in this society. And more important than that, I think the number one thing is that they don't understand, they wouldn't understand a lifestyle where we live behind walls and closed windows, for weather, for privacy. In Cambodia, when I go to Cambodia to see my sisters, we live in a room with 15 people. There's no such thing as having your own space. When I go to the room by myself to read, some little kid, some little person or old person will just come in and keep me company. Aren't you lonely? Aren't you scared? The village raised a child. Everybody lives together. My brothers, my sister. Over 100 Ungs have now grown out of the ashes of war, and we're still together. It's a very communal society, and they wouldn't understand that my brother, that we lock our doors at night and people have to call first before you can come and visit. And that for them is the scary part of American lifestyle.
And just one more question.
Yep.
I'm excited for your book. And
Thank you.
Is she going to be a part of her voice in there, or are you just going to tell her story?
I am telling her story through her point of view. So the book is a parallel story of my life in America, with an alternating chapters of her life in Cambodia. So it's just chapter here, chapter there. And it really is contrasting the chance and circumstances of both our lives and where we went, what we went through. So it's very exciting. I've been back to Cambodia many, many years, and I feel I know enough to tell her story, and I've interviewed her enough time and spent months on end with her. And also, I claim her story. I think in a genre where we write memoirs, and majority of memoirs that are being read over the world are written in English. And I think the world is ready to hear other voices. And just because she can't write in English, and she can't write in Cambodian, and she's illiterate, it doesn't mean, and it's not right, that her stories can't be heard. And if anybody has a right to claim her story and her voice, it's absolutely me. So the story is written in her voice and her point of view. I just got my first review from a reviewer. It's a book review, book list review, and they gave it a star review. And they actually said that I, exact quote, daringly used the parallel stories and the different her point of views, and was remarkably successful at it. So.
Thank you very much for the courage to tell your story, share it with us. I have a number of questions. I don't really know One thing is, you mentioned the tragedies that are still being created anew, let alone how long it takes to heal from those that have already been created. And I'm aware, I heard once that there was a big move to ban landmines,
Yes.
but the United States was the country which held out and refused to do that.
Yep.
I think we make a lot of them, don't we, in the first place?
Yeah, the U.S. do not no longer make landmines. But they hold the right to make them if in time of need. There's a moratorium on the manufacture and use of landmines. There was an international and is an international treaty to ban landmines. It's been signed by over 140 different countries. And it's been ratified by over 122 countries, and therefore it is international law. But among the non-signatories countries are Iraq, Iran, China, Pakistan, Russia, the U.S. And the U.S. is not known to sign any international treaties. Child labor treaties, the Kyoto treaties, the comprehensive test ban treaties, landmines treaties, international criminal court treaties. The U.S. has this whole mentality that we can police the world, but don't the world come together and try to set standards for us. And so with the landmines treaties, it was a matter of the U.S. not wanting to be part of the international treaty, and for many specific reasons that are very long and winded.
Thank you. One other sort of follow-up. I remember those times when you were going through that. I remember I was a young person here. I was a teenager here. And I remember those things going on, and we didn't hear about them very much. The media kept it fairly quiet. But I remember that many people here were convinced that we should spend this money to fight this, because otherwise we, Americans, would be in danger. We were at risk, and therefore we had to drop napalm, drop bombs. Some people said we should use nuclear weapons in Vietnam. And here we are again being told we're at risk from this country or that country, therefore we have to go fight there so they don't bring it here. It's again trying to scare people into using these tremendous weapons we have. Do you think Americans would be so quick to bring war to places if they'd experienced themselves on their own soil what war really is about?
Yeah, and it's very difficult, but Archibald MacLeish, a very well-known writer, had wrote a quote that I think is so true. In a world flooded with instant facts and information, we as human beings are at risk for losing our human ability to feel. And I think it is so difficult that with all the images of war, and we know more about war than what's taking place, but we don't know the emotional and destructive impacts to the soul and to the human bodies. And families and culture because of war. With that said, hindsight is always 2020. I think in Vietnam, the General Westmoreland, who the whole thing of actually in McNamara, who also the Secretary of National Security, said during the Vietnam War that we lost the war because we don't know the people. And that's exactly it. How much do we know about our neighbors? We don't know. And even in Cambodia right after the war, it's hard, even with my book, for people to realize what it was like. Because because we're a large population and it's not on our doorstep yet. And even though it's at the doorstep of many people, we're not listening with our heart. When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about it. And I even gone through Cambodia. I didn't know about the war, and I didn't know anything about Cambodia. And I remember at one time driving back from Vermont to Maine, and was very distraught, and was going through another episode and talking to my parents. And I figured, Hillary Clinton talks to Eleanor Roosevelt, I can talk to my mother. And my father, and I asked him, and I said, I'm having a really difficult time. I really need help. I need you to do two things for me. One, show me that there are angels out there looking out after me. And two, show me survivors. Show me Holocaust survivors who've not only gone through what they went through, but are thriving. not just surviving, but are thriving with family, with love, and are doing all right and not want to kill themselves. Then I got home, and I opened my mailbox, and there was a catalog on angels. Not mine. So I was thinking, no. And then I went home, and I turned on the TV, and Oprah was doing a show on Holocaust survivors, specifically the story of a woman who was rescued by an American GI and then found love and then had babies. And I thought, my gosh. But I share this story because I didn't ask them to show me Cambodian survivors or the survivors. I only knew about the Holocaust survivors. But that was after I saw that my parents gave me sign. I went on and read the most influential book in my life, Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning, and that just sent me on a path to do a lot of writing and researching, and sent me on a path to learn more. Thank you. And just one quick note, in Cambodia today, in Chicago, they just opened the first Genocide Memorial Museum, Cambodian Genocide Memorial Museum, and one of their biggest supporter at a tune of $300,000 for this 1.2 museum was from the Jewish community in Chicago. So we've gotten huge support from Jewish communities for the Cambodian plight. Yeah. Yay!
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I read your book. It's very moving, very painful. I've had a lot of experiences similar to yours. Maybe not as hard, but still pretty hard. Well, I could go on forever, but I think maybe the best thing to say is that I can't thank you enough for your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And it can't be said enough, because it's really easy to look away from all this painful stuff that's going on in the world. And having had a lot of your experiences, I'm really a firm believer that you have to keep bringing it up, and I wish it wasn't like that, but unfortunately, if you don't, then everybody, maybe myself included, goes and watches movies or cartoons or whatever, and it'll just be like that until there's peace. So,
Yeah.
Again, I'll stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is, you are my captive audience. Without you, I'd be paying my therapist $120 an hour. With that said, just one last note. None of us got here on our own. I wish I had it in my notes, but I didn't say it before everybody left. None of us got here on our own, and I'm so grateful for all those people who not only live the philosophy of work globally and locally, because without all of them, whose names I'll never know and faces I'll never see, the chances of me being here today would have been very, very slim. So I'm just so grateful for all the people, maybe people in your life, maybe your families, your grandmother, your sisters, your aunt, your mother, who took action and protested the war and sent help to Asia. It's because of all their actions I'm here today. So if I don't get to see them and you know them, please thank them for me as well. Thank you.
Thank everybody for coming.